At the end of this video, you'll understand the entirety of the following Japanese conversation.
あ、ゆき。
おはよう。
安藤さんです。
はじめまして、ゆきです。
よろしく。
ねえ、食べる？
食べる。おいしい。
よかったです。
I said in the past, along with nearly every beginner textbook out there, that X wa Y des is the formula for the most basic sentence structure in Japanese. X being the topic of the sentence, the wa particle marking that topic, Y being a noun or adjective, and this making it a statement, kinda like it is in English. But that's not quite right. I updated my understanding on this topic and I want to help you do so as well. Unless you're just getting started, which means you're in the lucky position of not having to unlearn anything. The most basic statement sentence structures in Japanese are actually the following: a noun plus desu, an adjective on its own, or with this added to the end, the des giving it more politeness, but it's often dropped in conversation, making our first structure y desu, no x or wa particle in sight. The second super basic statement sentence structure in Japanese is a verb on its own in the dictionary form, or other verb conjugations, which we'll cover in later videos. Let's look at some examples for both of these patterns. For a noun, we could have
寿司です。
It's sushi, sushi being our noun, and des meaning it is, marking it as a statement. Here's the most common adjective you'll hear on Japanese television.
おいしいです。
It's delicious. The des here adds politeness, and like I said, it's optional. For a verb, let's go with
食べる。
I will eat. All verbs can be used on their own in almost any conjugation, but today we'll stick to dictionary form since it's a simple statement of fact or intent. English is traditionally considered an SVO or subject verb object language. For example, I eat sushi. I is the subject, eat is the verb, and sushi is the object. You may have heard that Japanese is an SOV or subject-object verb language. Well, where's the subject, and for that matter the object in the sentence 食べる? And I did say sentence because that verb on its own is a grammatically correct sentence. It's not there, right? You may have heard about subjectless sentences in Japanese, but actually, there's no such thing as a subjectless sentence in Japanese. It's there. Murakami Haruki's translator, J. Rubin, in the book Making Sense of Japanese, says that the greatest single obstacle to a precise understanding of the Japanese language is the mistaken notion that many Japanese sentences don't have subjects. He goes on to explain that this makes students think that Japanese sentences can exist which don't refer to anything or anyone at all, which is nonsense. He says that Japanese actually lacks frequently used pronouns for subjects brought up earlier in discussion or that are obvious from context. Instead, we have what he refers to as the zero pronoun. We'll talk about that more in the video I'm working on about the Japanese particles wa and ga, which are confused with each other a lot and which I'll link to in the description when that video is finished. If you want to know when that comes out, please consider subscribing. But for now, just know that taberu or oishii on their own are perfectly understandable sentences based on A, context, or B, something brought up earlier, which would make it context. To illustrate this, here's the first half of our conversation from the beginning of this video.
あ、ゆき。
おはよう。
安藤さんです。
はじめまして、ゆきです。
よろしく。
I say, Yuki. Yuki responds with an
おはよう。
which is a casual version of good morning. The full version being
おはようございます。
Ohayo gozaimasu. You then see her looking at Ando-san as if to say, who's this? That's our context. In answer to that look, I say, Ando-san desu. Ando-san is his name, thus a proper noun, and we have desu. It is, or this is. I do not need to say, これは Ando-san desu. Kore being a pronoun that means this, giving us a pronoun, and wa particle. This is what the textbook XはYですformula would make you expect here. That would actually be a bit dramatic. According to J. Rubin again, it would be a bit like saying, and I'm paraphrasing here as he uses a different example, but
I know not who these other folks are, but this is Ando-san.
a wonderful introduction to be sure, but dramatic. Anyway, Yuki responds with
はじめまして、ゆきです。
hajimemashite, which is a common way to say nice to meet you. Literally, it means first time, but it is used to mean nice to meet you. She follows this up with her first name. She does not say what many of you might expect if you've seen a beginner textbook, which is
私はゆきです。
watashi wa yuki desu. Watashi being the most basic pronoun for I and our trusty wa particle. She simply says
ゆきです。
there are other ways to introduce yourself that are a bit more formal and complex, but among people your own age and in situations like the one we just saw, just your name plus desu is quite normal. We don't need the watashi wa. We know who she's talking about from context. Thus, the zero pronoun or the unspoken pronoun. Using Jay Rubin's example, having watashi wa would be like her saying,
I don't know who these other people are, but as for me, I'm Yuki.
Anyway, Ando-san responds, yoroshiku, which is a very casual version of
よろしくお願いします。
yoroshiku onegai shimasu, which is another way to say nice to meet you, but literally translates to please be good to me. By the way, hajimemashite and yoroshiku onegai shimasu are often used together. For example,
はじめまして、アンディです。34歳です。よろしくお願いします。
nice to meet you. I'm Andy. 34 is 34, and sai is how we say years old, plus dis to make it polite and mark it as a statement. Finally, please be good to me. So now that we have y dis out of the way where y is a noun, let's look at the second half of our conversation, which contains an adjective and verb.
ねえ、食べる？
お、食べる。お、おいしい。
よかったです。
Let's break this down. Yuki says,
ねえ、食べる？
the ne here is just a way of getting someone's attention in casual conversation. In casual conversations, a verb in its dictionary form with a rising intonation is enough to create a question. We can tell from context that she's referring to the brownies. If this were on the phone or something, she may have said the object, brownie, plus the o particle, which marks direct objects and which we'll talk about in a later lesson, and taberu, the verb to eat. But in this case, the verb on its own is correct. In a situation like this, it's sort of a lighthearted, wanna try this? If we were to go to the textbook route with a pronoun like kore and the wa particle as in kore wa taberu, it would sound more like, among all of these things, will you eat this one? It's a structure for a very specific situation, clearly different from this one. Ando-san responds with taberu, literally just eat or will eat. We can tell from context it means that he will eat it. He then eats it and says oishii, which we learned earlier means delicious. He doesn't need to say this is delicious or anything. And to be fair, in English, we would probably just say something like or yum as well, so it's not that weird. Yuki responds with
よかったです。
yokatta desu. Yokatta means good, and the des just adds a little bit of politeness and emphasis in this case. Let's hear what this would have sounded like if we went the unnatural textbook route.
これは食べる？
私は食べる。これはおいしいです。
それはよかったです。
This conversation sounds very unnatural.
すごい、ロボットみたい。
The only part that actually sounds okay here is the sore, which means that, wa, yokatta desu. This you might actually hear in this situation. The rest sounds like a Disney musical or something. Like I said, the most basic sentence structure in Japanese is not X wa Y des. The most basic structures are actually y des, where y is a noun, adjective, or pronoun, as we can use things like kore in the y position, and a verb on its own.
あ、ゆき。
おはよう。
あ、安藤さんです。
はじめまして、ゆきです。
よろしく。
ねえ、食べる？
お、食べる。お、おいしい。
よかったです。
If you want to get some practice with these two basic structures, you can access a practice video for free by signing up to the mailing list on this website. Or if you're already a full member on that website, you can access vocabulary videos, practice videos, shadowing videos, the transcript for this video, a community learning together, and more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.